Welcome to Community Church Unitarian Universalist virtual worship service, where we gather each week beyond our four walls to be together in these unique times. I'm Alan Malone, CCUU member and worship associate, and today we have Jim O'Neill, and he will be offering the sermon, Searching for the Soul of America. Jim and his wife Vera joined our congregation over 3 years ago. Having previously been members of the UU Church in Baton Rouge, Jim left the Catholic priesthood and has served for over 40 years as a licensed professional counselor. Jim also attended the latest session of the Shared Pulpit Seminar on sermon writing, so he is well versed in preparing and delivering religious services. The originally scheduled service for today was supposed to have been presented by our member, Reverend Jacqueline Luck, but she is still recovering from an illness, and Jim agreed to give us this presentation as a substitute. Reverend Jacqueline's service will be given at a later date. I'd like to pause here and let people know that we're in a transitionary period in this in the history of this institution, and we usually ask for people when they first begin coming to this church that they share with us their treasure, their time, and their talents. And we're particularly in need of your talents these days. We have a crew that works the camera and the technical equipment. We have suddenly been faced with the need to have these technical people since we're going technical now instead of everybody being at church. And on the 26th of August, we don't have anybody to run the equipment. There's an example of one of the things that we need. We also need people to volunteer to serve on committees. The worship committee on which I serve is now without a leader, and we need to reorganize that. There are little shufflings going on within the organization. So if you have any inclination to serve and you've been putting it off, this would be a great time to approach any of us and let us know that you're available, and particularly if you have a particular skill or interest, we'd really like to hear from you sometime soon. Community Church Unitarian Universalist is a progressive, open-minded, and inclusive religious community. All who are on a spiritual search for truth and meaning are welcome. Ours is a faith in action as we do the work of justice and elevate compassion in our quest to live ethically in recognition of the inherent worth and dignity of everybody. We believe it is not necessary to think alike in order to love alike. We are very glad to have you join us in this service of worth and giving. And now our hymn number 1. Oh, you want to tell us that? Okay. It is Community Church's custom to light the chalice, invoking hope and eternal truth to our worship. Please join me in reading the words in the chat box together. We light this flame, which was written by our member, Bert Brunson. We light this flame to affirm the light of truth and knowledge and the warmth of love and community and the fire of hope and commitment. Our first reading is called Patriotism by Frederick Bruckner. As isms run out in the end, and good riddance to most of them, patriotism, for example. If patriots were people who stand by their country, right or wrong, Germans who stood by Adolf Hitler in the Third Reich should be adequate proof that we've had enough of them. If patriots are people who believe not only that anything they consider unpatriotic is wrong, and anything that they consider as wrong to be unpatriotic, The late Senator Joseph McCarthy and his backers should be enough to make us avoid them like the plague. If patriots are people who believe things like better dead than red, they should be shown films of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and 9th of 1945, respectively, and then be taken to the funny farm. The only patriots worth their salt are the ones who love their country enough to see that in the nuclear age, it, meaning the country, is not going to survive unless the world survives. True patriots are no longer champions of democracy, communism, or anything like that, but champions of the whole human race. It is not the homeland that they feel called on to defend at any cost, but the planet Earth as a whole. If in the interest of making sure we don't blow ourselves off the map once and for all, we end up relinquishing a measure of national sovereignty to some international body, so much the worse for national sovereignty. There is only one sovereignty that matters ultimately, and that is of another kind whatsoever. Church Unitarian Universalist is a self-sustaining congregation. Your generosity enables the congregation to fulfill its mission and within and beyond these church walls. You can give it online or by text. You can make arrangements with your bank for a gift, and you can mail a check to CCUU 70124. This information should be at the bottom of your screen at the text. The chat box will be up. If it's not already, it'll be up soon. Reverend Jim will now give the second reading.
I wrote this song on January 7th this year. sing my sorrow to the stars on this cold, dry January night. Tide makes me cry through salty, tear-filled skies, but the change you have to feel. So I'll lean into truth and bid farewell to my youth, and I'll hurt, but I'll heal on this cold, dry January night. All my patterns turn into grief, comes in waves, and won't quite pass me by. Saved by searching for the sun. Time lets me fly through salty, tear-filled skies, but the change you have to know. So I'll lean into truth and bid farewell to my youth, and I'll breathe, and I'll grow on this cold, dry January night. All my patterns turn into grief, comes in waves and won't quite pass me by, but through it all I can't deny I'll be saved by searching for the sun on this cold, dry January night. Oh, this night.
Thank you, Cindy. That was beautiful. Our second reading is entitled American Soulicide. I wrote this reflection on the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor. So as I read it, you might imagine that image in your mind. When did we begin killing off our American soul? Not in throwing off the king's oppression, nor by making one nation under God, with freedom and justice for all. No, it began when one nation under God was replaced by separatism, when for all became for me, when progress came to mean possessions, and better was equated with more, when we dedicated the new shrine called the most powerful nation in the world. We left behind years as victims of oppression, took control, grasped power with a vengeance born of painful buried memories, with a vengeance fed by atrocities unforgiven, with a vengeance for all who stood in our way. We were right, we were free, we were powerful, we were crusaders, and then we became oppressors. We pillaged this land, slaughtered the buffalo, humiliated and killed its native people. We did it with arrogant, grandiose power, never seen. We were destroying ourselves, perpetuating an oppression that would soon victimize us again with hatred and violence. How Soulicide is rooted in the genocide that haunts and contaminates us still. They were the people who loved the earth, who knew it to be their mother, who felt connection with all living things, who submitted to ancient wisdom. We knew better. They were ignorant. We could master everything in our path. What stood in the way of our progress was destroyed, and once we had mastered the red in their land, it was easy to enlist and enslave the black. And our grand old lady, the Statue of Liberty, symbol of freedom and welcome to all, now stands hollow, soulless. Greed hardens her heart, prejudice eats away her flesh, power distorts her vision, pride fills her head with air, privilege puts out her welcoming torch. What is left? An empty shell, justice and peace, gone to hell. Some turn to God in desperation, but he is missing. Others say he is dead. Others find God down here below, but she is vulnerable, still becoming. That news turns loose the tiny tyrants. If God is too weak and powerless to intervene, egos step into the vacuum and take control. That tyranny leaves us ravaged and running our dark shadows in constant pursuit. America, come home to your tormented soul. Weep over your ravaged land and your displaced people. Soften your heart with compassion. Flesh out your principles with justice. See again with the eyes of respect. Embrace the humility of the Creator. And light the welcoming fire of freedom. And you will once again, gracious lady, raise your torch of hope to all our friends. For we must make no mistake about it now. On this, our small, beautiful planet, there's no longer room for enemies. All the killing now is Soulicide.
Joy and sorrow within the congregation are recognized within our worship. And in this virtual service, I invite you to write your public messages in the chat box to be read after a moment of reflective silence. You can do that right now if you would. And my wife Marilyn will record those, and they'll be read by Reverend Jim in just a few minutes.
We express our sorrow that Reverend Jacqueline could not be with us today. We have hope that we will hear her sermon soon. This is from Alicia Cook. Just really miss y'all and wish we weren't still forced to meet this way. Frustrated with our collective national failure to take care of each other and achieve herd immunity, so we can once more enjoy the bonds of in-person community. Sorrow at those who have put their lives and the lives of others at risk by not being vaccinated. Gratitude for those who have been vaccinated and taken necessary precautions. And now we light a candle each for all the sorrows and all the joys that go unexpressed. Sorrow for those medical workers having to face this surge of COVID cases. May they find support and comfort. Joy in watching my dad deliver these powerful words in today's sermon from Lisa O'Neill. And now we'll have a candle lit for all the sorrows that remain hidden in our hearts and we're not ready fully to express. And another candle for all the joys that well up in our hearts that we haven't found words for yet. Thank you for your patience with our adjustments to the change in schedule. If we learn nothing else during this pandemic, it's about flexibility and making adjustments. I was surprised, then dismayed to see this summer on CBS Sunday Morning that while I've heard over the years so much about Woodstock as a symbol of the 60s, I had never heard a word about the Harlem Cultural Festival, also known as Black Woodstock. It was held during the same summer of 1969 to celebrate African American music and culture and to promote the continued politics of Black pride. While Woodstock was held on August 15th through 18th of 1969 and attracted 400,000, Black Woodstock was held on consecutive Sundays from the end of June through the end of August of the same summer, with crowds of 40 to 50,000 every Sunday, filling the grounds of Mount Morris Park in Harlem. Why was this festival virtually ignored, with the complete recordings sitting in a basement for 50 years? The film producer at the time tried to get it to the attention it deserved, but he was ignored. Finally, last year, one man, Amir Questlove Thompson, who was there as a child, could not forget the festival and its profound impact, and he set out to produce the documentary film entitled Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised. If you have a chance, see it. I found it recently on Hulu and was blown away by the incredible number of talented musicians who performed. I'm talking about Stevie Wonder, Nina Simone, B.B. King, The Fifth Dimension, Gladys Knight and the Pips, Mahalia Jackson, Mavis Staples and family. And of course, Sly and the Family Stone, whose everyday people Nick did such a wonderful job with today. Just as powerful as the music was the message that black was beautiful, powerful, joyful, and incredibly resilient. That summer, the word Negro was replaced by black. Remember, this was soon after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., and the whole country was reeling in profound grief, fear, and anger, while being forced to face the deep roots of racism, prejudice, and discrimination. What we saw back then on television was a lot of footage of Woodstock and of Apollo landing on the moon. But the Harlem Cultural Festival was virtually unknown and invisible. No surprise, right? After all, who was making the decisions about what was worthy of television time? It certainly wasn't black people. I encourage you to see the film, Summer of Soul, which is now available on Hulu, as well as other platforms. What you will see is a strong contrast to the Woodstock images of stoned, half-naked, carousing hippies. As far as the eye can see, 50,000 black individuals and families are packed together, standing together, with some on top of the rock formations in the background, or even up in the trees, and they're swaying, clapping, and joyfully singing with the performers. The mayor of New York, John Lindsley, was there to honor the event, and Jesse Jackson to provide encouragement. But the main event was the music, soul music, gospel music, music from many cultures, music that embodied how soul and spirit celebrate how blacks and other oppressed minorities have faced and overcome enormous obstacles to be there in joyful song. Black Panthers, not the NYPD, provided the security, and there was, to my knowledge, no incidents of violence or drunkenness. It was a peaceful and joyful celebration, which clearly provided hope and encouragement to the Harlem community that faced so many struggles and obstacles just to survive. Another surprise for me is how enduring most of the music at the festival is today. Why, I wonder, when so much music of the past has faded away? That soul music endures because it rises out of deep feeling and soulful longings and dreams of an oppressed people, striving for freedom and equality, that this nation holds out as a promise for all who came to this country seeking freedom from oppression. I'm reminded of the short, powerful poem by Langston Hughes entitled Harlem. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat? Or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? Now, 70 years after Hughes wrote that poem in 1951, can we answer his question of what happens to a dream that is so long deferred? We now understand the explosions in our country, when black dreams and black lives are treated like they still do not matter. These explosions of protest will continue until the dream of equal rights for all is realized. The poem American Soulicide asks the question of when we began killing off our soul. Surely not in fighting off the King of England's oppression. That was justified, and declaring our independence from such domination was a soulful, courageous process in which our forefathers were risking certain death in order to take the stand that, quote, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed with certain unalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We know now that the words, all men, caps on the all, was not an insignificant oversight on the part of the drafters of the Declaration. Obviously, at that time, all did not include black men. In the white patriarchal culture that contaminates us still, all men meant all white men. It was not until December 6, 1865 that slavery was abolished. That's 89 years later. And of course, abolishing slavery did not mean equal rights and justice for blacks. We're still working on that. So it took 89 years for all men to include black men. Now what about the words, all men, caps on the men? It took 144 years before we as a nation figured out that all men should rightfully include half of the human race, women. It was on August 26, 1920, when the 19th Amendment prohibited denying the right to vote on the basis of sex, in effect, recognizing the right of women to vote. But of course, we all know the amendment did not grant women the equal rights they deserve. Women are still fighting for that every day, to be treated equally in the workplace, where white women still earn only 80% of what their male counterparts earn. And all women can tell you of the issue of male dominance and female subordinates is not just about pay. The issues about sexual harassment continue to explode in the news, as spelled out in the Me Too movement, as well as the recent expose about sexual harassment in the military. Military has long been a male-dominated hierarchy that has covered up its harassment and discriminatory practices against women. Finally, action has been taken to establish independent judicial bodies to adjudicate claims by women of rape and harassment in the military. For too long, we allowed foxes to guard the henhouse. So how are other male patriarchies and hierarchies working these days? One clear tragic example is the pedophilia crisis in the male Catholic hierarchy. Can you imagine that crisis would have reached the proportions it has if the hierarchy included women priests and married priests? Would mothers have stood by silently while their sons were being molested? Would they have covered up the abuse and foisted predator priests on other church communities rather than drum the predators out? One of the real blessings and attractions of the Unitarian Church is we are consciously working to root out inequality and discrimination as best we can, and welcoming women into the ministry and leadership positions. We're a work in progress, as the 2017 leadership crisis in UUA revealed discriminatory hiring practices favoring white males. At that time, 121 UU ministers wrote the UU Board of Trustees a letter which said, I quote, "The practice of hiring white people nearly to the exclusion of hiring people of color is alarming and not indicative of the communal practices to which our faith calls us." So, white male supremacy has roots in our community as well, and we have to work hard to weed it out. I think we're doing a good job in having women in key leadership positions. We obviously have more work to do in attracting and welcoming more people of color into our community. It's a whole other issue for us as Americans to look at the real history of our country in a manner that honors the indigenous people of this country. How long will it take for Native Americans to be granted their full rights and equality? Last year's General Assembly featured Roxanne Dunbar, the author of An Indigenous History of the United States. Just one example is her suggestion that you draw on a piece of paper, or now in your mind's eye, a rough outline of the U.S. at the time it gained independence from Britain. Did you draw a picture of 13 colonies hugging the Atlantic shore? Or, as most have done when asked, draw an outline of the United States today? We actually know better, but we forget. This land was not our land in 1783. And most histories of the United States talk about being discovered by Christopher Columbus and then the expansion westward in search of adventure and a better life. It's a myth-like origin story that unfortunately leaves out key aspects of what actually happened and emphasizes others. This doctrine of discovery, blessed by religious leaders, is embedded in most of our views of America. Obviously, that story ignores the long history of Native Americans on this land. The poem American Soulicide describes the soul-killing behavior in our history. And it is an appeal to Americans to do some serious soul searching. I believe that's a challenge we face today. The past two elections, and particularly the January 6th attack on the Capitol and our democracy, reveals that there are a large number of Americans who continue to embrace the narrative of white male supremacy and are determined to use all means, including violence, to impose their views, believing they're being patriotic in doing so. Buechner's reading on patriotism exposes how dangerous that is, and has been historically. But we can no longer live in the denial or illusion that those views will simply die out and go away. Those fires of insurrection and division are being fanned daily, and we best be vigilant and engaged in preserving our democracy and work in every way we can to bring about a more perfect union. But forget more perfect union, okay? For the moment, can we work to hold this nation together as one people? We cannot ignore the reality that in many countries, divisions have developed that have lasted for decades, even centuries. Whether we look at the Middle East wars among sects, or the painful history in Northern Ireland, or the deadly conflict between Israeli and Palestinians, we need to be aware that as much as we want to believe the end of the Civil War brought about true union in this country, it's just not so. Is the Declaration of Independence currently expressing the hopes and dreams and the soul of the American people today? Are we really working for a more perfect union are always splintering into factions looking for dominance. Our current president is working hard to create bipartisan cooperation and emphasizing we are the United States. But so many are fanning the flames of division, hate, and mistrust that it's an uphill struggle every day. And I think we have to face the realistic possibility that our democracy may not survive. So what do we do as UUs in the face of the battle for the soul of America? Well, we have the commitment to live out each day our covenant, our 7 principles. The more we embody them in our everyday activities, the more we are offering to those near and far a vision of life as a community that is consistent with the Declaration of Independence. When we do, I believe we honor the deepest longings of our individual souls and the hopes and dreams that founded this imperfect union. Most of the messages bombarding us every day are not calls to our souls. They are calls to our egos, our ambitions, our greed, our fears and prejudices, but not our deepest, wisest selves, not our souls. We have to do that work each day of feeding our souls. That work is up to us as individuals and us as a community. But even if we accomplish a more perfect union in this country, we know that that will not be nearly enough to save our precious earth, which we are destroying daily by global climate change. We now know we don't have 89 years or 144 years to abolish slavery or give women the right to vote. In his recent film, David Attenborough, A Life on Our Planet, please see it, I recommend it highly. He warns us in no uncertain terms that we have a short window of time to save the human community before we make life on this planet uninhabitable. The wildfires, the floods, the increasing intensity of storms, the poverty and the pandemic can only be ignored at our peril. Our Mother Earth is communicating urgently, calling to our deepest, wisest soul. If we listen, we will hear the call to participate in saving our human community. It's the call of our 7th principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are all a part. How we answer that urgent call is up to each of us. Our benediction is taken from the poem with an added verse. America, come home to your tormented soul. Weep over your ravaged land and your displaced people. Soften your heart with compassion. Flesh out your principles with justice. See again with the eyes of respect. Embrace the humility of the created and light the welcoming fire of freedom. And you will once again, gracious Lady, raise your torch of hope to all our friends. For we must make no mistake about it now, on this our small, beautiful planet. All the killing now is soulicide, and all the loving gives us hope.
Amen to that. I'm glad you joined us in this time of worship and worth giving and hope. And we hope that something in this service spoke to you, and that we'll see you back next week. We're going to have the final musical selection.